We would never buy a used car without first looking under the hood, making sure it wasn't all rusted through, that the parts were all in there and looked in good working order, and giving it a test drive first. But for some reason, we do that with our philosophies, our spiritualities, our religions, our ideologies all the time. We don't take a look at them before we just jump in headlong. We just resonate with them and feel, yeah, this is the one for me, and rush in wholehearted. And I'm not trying to argue against enthusiasm, because enthusiasm is important. But so is living with open eyes and an open heart. So today we're going to be talking about St. John Cassian and how he taught us the art of discernment. This is something that can be used in so many places in your life, and how that can be applied to many things, but mainly to seeing creation spirituality as a spiritual technology as we walk together down creation's path. Hello everyone, my name is Charlie. I am a Christopagan druid and priest of Bridget.
Hello everyone, my name is Brian. I'm a Christopagan druid and sous chef to the Dagda.
And today we're going to be looking at St. John Cassian's method of discernment and how that applies to creation spirituality as a spiritual technology. But not just that. Once you learn these simple rules of discernment that, by the way, are not specifically tied to any one ideology or theology in particular, you can use this in a lot of places in your life. And really, it will help you figure out if you're bringing in things that are good for you or not. So I highly recommend that. Before we get started, I just want to do a brief introduction on this. Tomorrow, there will be a post going up over at creationspath.com that goes into the idea of the four paths as a spiritual technology in a lot more detail. But for today, a spiritual technology is just a metaphor that we use to kind of take apart spiritual practice, work, and theology to see its moving parts and understand how it's working, why it's working, and if it's broken, how to fix it. It's a very valuable way to look at these ideas that allows us a lot more freedom. Because when we believe they came to us from on high, yeah, you're not really allowed to do that. But as we all know, even the greatest of the prophets interpreted their messages through their own culture, bias, and belief. So we need to look and see how all of this pertains to us right now, today, in our world. It's up to each generation to go back into their traditions and bring them alive in the world that they live in. But before we get into all that, if you haven't already, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, whatever the terminology happens to be on whatever app you're listening to us on. We work really hard to make sure that we're bringing you the best in Christopagan and creation spirituality information and formation on the internet. If you would like to know more about that, and this always feels so weird to do, but I wrote a book with an introduction by Matthew Fox, which still feels surreal, called Creation's Past, a Creation Spirituality Primer, that if you would like to know more about creation spirituality, this will not only just walk you through the ideas, but each chapter includes not just like an exercise or some prompt questions to think about, but an actual practice that will help you experience what we're talking about in your daily life. So that it's not just getting head knowledge, it's bringing it all the way down into your bones. So if you want to, you can check that out. That's currently available over at Amazon. It's available to Kindle Unlimited readers for a limited time to read there. And if you are a contributing and supporting member of creationspath.com, go to the library and you'll find your copy of it right there. All right, let's just get into it now, shall we? So for a lot of us, this arises in us because we have all experienced some form of religious abuse or trauma, or we've seen it happen so readily to others that we've become a very cynical and jaded. Why become a part of a thing when that thing can just hurt me? We've watched this from everything from the extreme examples of something like the People's Temple that started off as a way to help the poor and then turned into Jonestown. We've seen this in the preachers that would run around claiming to be helping people, but were only lining their own pockets and taking money that was supposed to go to relief aid to help smuggle diamonds out of Liberia. If you know, you know. This has been a recurring problem throughout history and throughout time. If somebody comes to you with a good idea or a group seems to be doing something that's positive for the world, how do we know that we can trust anything? St. John Cassian gives us a basic discernment model that can help us with anything. How do I know that I should try this form of prayer or meditation? How do I know if yoga is right for me? How do I know if this church is a place where I want to live and raise my family? A lot of questions that really do have difficult answers. And I'm not saying that Cassian's system gives us a simple or clear answer, but it gives us a way to kind of tease this apart so it's not just a matter of, well, I guess I have to go off of blind trust or just never become a part of anything.
I think also interesting footnote here with St. John Cassian's discernment practice, just to put it into context of history. This was written in roughly, what, 2nd century? So
I think second, somewhere in there.
2nd, 3rd century, before Augustine, before fall redemption, before original sin. So even when you think back to like last week and stuff, when we were talking about original sin, this is before all these concepts come in, which also is refreshing. You know, I know I found that neat when I learned about that little bit of history nugget. Like this was a practice, discernment practice that I was already using and doing before I understood that little nifty footnote. But it was also like, oh, that makes more sense too.
And his work was derived from him going around and talking to the desert elders, the mothers and fathers who had fled to the desert to get away from some of the other nonsense that was going on in other parts of Christianity at the time. And even Benedict of Nursia, the Saint Benedict, when you think of the Benedictines or monasticism, admonished his monks that the only works other than the Bible that they should spend all their time reading were the works of John Cassian, which, of course, later becomes the works of Augustine. But that's a topic for another day and something we've talked about a lot.
Yeah. So on these 4 steps, the first one is recognize if something is truly valuable.
Value is a hard thing for us to really grapple with. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that we are currently living in late stage capitalism. So when we think of value, we tend to think of monetary value. Oh, will this make me money? Will this make me rich? Will this make me more productive? And it's really sad, especially to see mindfulness practice fall victim to that trap. And that, yes, you should practice mindfulness because it'll make you more productive, which will help you make more money. Yeah, but the peace of mind and clarity of thought is really important and is kind of the primary values that we'd really like to see come from that. So when we say value, what are we talking about here? Value means, is it meaningful? Is it bringing something of value to you? I love to sing Christmas carols, for example. I know a lot of people are annoyed by Christmas carols because, again, the stores in their late-stage capitalistic ways just pipe them in starting in about, I don't know, August, September, sometimes October, and just flood the area with them. I still love them because I think about sitting around with my family, with my friends when I was younger in the Christmas season and singing these songs that mean something to me. So to me, those songs have value, but I can clearly see how they have lost their value to others. That meaningfulness is the real thing that we're looking for here. Also, that it's not taking something of value away. There are many practices that I did when I was an evangelical that just took experiences away from me. I wasn't supposed to watch secular TV or listen to secular music because that's where the devil is. Yeah, but the devil was also in the churches doing terrible and dastardly things. So just by saying this is church approved did not guarantee that the devil was not there. So that kind of robbed me of some experiences that I might have had if I had not been so closed off and afraid to participate in the world. I would have been able to relate to a lot of my peers better and been able to have better relationships with them. So value is a very complex question that honestly we all need to kind of ask ourselves, what brings value to our lives? So we all need to figure out what brings value to our lives and use that as the metric.
And then for me, it kind of cracks me up because I always like to bring in edification, which in and of itself goes to show some of the things that I value, because edification is the act of uplifting, instructing, or improving someone intellectually, morally, or spiritually. Of course, that's someone being the self. And since we're here to make better, try to repair and make better life around us, including ourselves, that's where that value of edification comes in. But I often ask myself, well, is this actually edifying? Because I think for me, part of the discernment process within this step is, as we would say, the via negativa part of this step is sitting back and going, is this something I need, I want, or is this actually valuable? And trying to separate that out, or at least see, because sometimes it can be, you might need it and want it, and it might also be valuable. But a lot of times, oftentimes you'll find out that it's just something that's nice that you want, that you then try to justify by claiming it as valuable, but it doesn't actually edify, it doesn't build yourself up. Since we all are living in the kingdom, we have certain tasks, duties, responsibilities that we've taken on. And so those things are then valuable to us. So does it help to meet those things or achieve those goals? So the second one, check if it's genuine, not counterfeit.
Now, this is a fun one because we can use this in a lot of ways. One, you'll notice I never quote from 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, or Titus because they're not genuine. Someone was pretending to be Paul, and they don't even align with Paul's ideas. I also quote a lot from James, sometimes from Jude, and those aren't genuinely from them either. Same with the 1st and 2nd Peter, especially 2nd Peter. 1st Peter might have been, maybe, but probably not. So what makes James genuine and 1st, 2nd Timothy, and Titus not? It's not just that they weren't written by the person that we ascribe them to, it's that they don't hold the values that we see these people having. We have actual genuine letters of Paul. So we kind of know what Paul stood for, what he believed. He didn't have a low view of women. In fact, he talks about women who were apostles and deacons and thanks them and extols them for the good work that they're doing in the community. So the pastoral epistles really kind of fail at that mark. He had a very different idea of salvation and what it meant and what church order looked like than what we find in those books. So there isn't a genuineness there. Though the tradition that we have of James and Peter, preserved in other things like the Acts of the Apostles and other places, do tend to align with what we see in those books, and those probably came out of Petrine and Jacobite sources. But just beyond that, this is where the buzzword of our age, and I think the word that it has lost so much of its meaning, comes in, and that's authenticity. One of the things that first started driving a wedge between me and the evangelical church that I grew up in, yes, there were the questions, there were the concerns and all of that, but also because I worked in the church office, I got to see the pastor when he wasn't in the pulpit, and he wasn't genuinely practicing what he preached. And that bothered me because I was someone who believed that, like, if you're preaching this stuff, you should be living it. And I wasn't seeing that in him. That's a big part of what this, is it genuine and not fake, really comes down to when we're trying to discern a group. Earlier, I talked about the People's Temple. You could tell very early on that Jim Jones wasn't really practicing what he preached. He had spouts of very violent and paranoid anger, even in the early days when he was the darling of politicians and was being invited to all of the galas. All of those things that should have given people pause were there the whole time. But because the message sounded good and the intentions sounded good, people were willing to overlook clear warning signs that this person was not genuinely who and what he said he was. And this led a lot of people to leave the movement before they moved to Guyana. That kind of genuineness, where you're looking to see, does this person actually practice what they preach? Are the people that say you're going to a yoga group and they're telling you that this will help you with your physical health and it will help you with your mental well-being, if they're all frazzled and completely lost and, not getting better physically, maybe that style of yoga or that teacher of yoga isn't genuinely imparting what they're supposed to be doing. Genuineness in this sense is really about, what is the source of this? Where is this coming from? Is it the greed, the desire for authority and power of the person telling it to you? Or is it something that's actually useful and helpful that a person has discovered and is honestly sharing?
That's where you really hit on the hypocrisy. It becomes a easier tool to use during this when you're evaluating something genuine. It's something I picked up on while reading the stories of Jesus and reading what Jesus preached and taught about. It was one of the things that Jesus really pointed at was, this person's living in hypocrisy, that person's living in hypocrisy. They're saying you got to do one thing, and then their behavior is opposite. And so hypocrisy really does become a nice tool for pulling out the counterfeit very easily. And Charlie cited wonderful examples of how to tell hypocrisy.
And for some people, especially if you allow yourself to always have that little bit of you that's looking for that genuineness. I remember growing up when Oral Roberts first said that God said that he would strike him dead if he didn't raise $1 million by a certain date. And all the alarm bells went off in my brain that, why would God do that? That doesn't make sense at all. That sounds like he's trying to feed on people's emotions and faith to get a whole bunch of money real fast. And so he got moved out of the genuine and authentic category in my head really quickly, even though I was raised in a world where he was in the genuine and authentic place. Though a lot of people that I knew at the time hand waved it away. Just, oh, no. He's just being hyperbolic. It's just rhetoric. Mm.
And I think the other thing to keep in mind through all of this is, remember, nothing is permanent. So people, things, they change, evolve over time. It's just one of those things to also remember. Don't work in absolutes. You can have people, because people are complex, so they can have genuine moments. They could struggle with hypocrisy. We all struggle with falling off the path. What all of us talks about sin and redemption has been about how you fall off the path, you get back on the path. So I just wanted to add that in here when you're talking about this discernment. As Charlie was just demonstrating, they go into that caution category. They go into this middle ground of like, well, so they had a counterfeit moment. So now they get a little more evaluation, and everybody likes to use the phrase benefit of doubt. They got the benefit of doubt, but they don't really think about it nowadays, or at least I don't see them demonstrating, really thinking about it's a benefit that's earned and can be taken away. And so,
or better, spent.
Yeah. Those counterfeit moments spend that benefit of doubt, and then you have to prove more and more with them because they don't just get the pass. They haven't proven that they're genuine.
And also not falling into category errors just because Anne Catherine Emmerich was an anti-Semitic charlatan who had fever dreams while sick and wrote them down. Julian of Norwich had a very genuine experience that has moved and touched a lot of people that doesn't carry that same similar baggage. So being careful of making category errors, just because one person in a group is bad does not necessarily mean the entire category needs to be thrown out. It does mean that the entire category requires more scrutiny, though.
Yeah, because and that's a great example of that, because some people want to go, well, just because some examples of visionary experiences were actually mental trauma induced by either impact or magnets doesn't mean all of them are necessarily that. But that check, is it genuine or counterfeit? Is it hypocrisy or not? And when I was going through the Buddhist training, one of the things was like, on the note of visionary stuff, they always were like, that's personal. That's for you. If it has no value for you, which goes back to the first question, you can let it go. It doesn't matter. just let it go. It doesn't matter about everybody else. It's what value does it have for you? And it was like that was a way of telling the genuineness of a supernatural or preternatural. I don't like using the word supernatural because it's technically all in this world, but that's a whole other conversation. You'd have to go way back in the episodes to get back to that one. The third one, verify it bears the right image or intention.
This is a hard one for a lot of people today because we can be distracted by the way something looks. So what does it mean to bear the right image or intention? Well, if somebody comes to you and says, this is Jesus, something Jesus said, and then follows that up with that people should not eat unless they're working. Okay, well, that was Paul, and that's Paul taken out of context, and Paul was not Jesus. So, yeah, just on face value, we can sit back and question this person's message because, well, it'd be one thing if you misquoted Paul and took Paul out of context and attributed it to Paul. We can have a conversation there. I'm not sure that you just didn't misunderstand this passage. But you said that Jesus said it, and Jesus didn't say it. Paul did. So the image that you're putting forward is, by nature, flawed. Did they misspeak? Maybe. That's just part of the benefit of the doubt that Brian was just talking about. Maybe they did misspeak. Maybe that was the problem there. Maybe just ask them, like, Paul said that. And he was actually talking about how when everybody brings their goods together to be distributed amongst the community, there are those that have things that they could contribute, but they don't because they're just there out of the greed of getting something, and they could have contributed something.
Yeah.
Like if you see that in its context, it's saying something very different from what you're taking it to mean. So, because basically, just to explain that one to you real quick, because I hear this one a lot. During the agape meals, which would evolve into the Eucharist and the communion rites that the churches have today, they were potlucks. Everyone brought food. On the tables, there would also be the bread and the water or wine, depending on the community. And yes, some communities used water instead of wine for this, but everybody brought something. And then Paul says, okay, so everybody's bringing stuff. So all the rich people who brought the really expensive food, don't just share the expensive food amongst yourselves. You brought food for the whole gathering. That food needs to be shared with the whole gathering. So you should be eating and sharing what everyone brought. And some people are showing up that could have brought something, but didn't. So why are they allowed to sit at the table and eat? They're just showing up to be seen. That's a whole different thing. They were trying to get clout with somebody that was in the room, and so they showed up, but they didn't actually participate in what was going on. A very different thing. So how can you determine whether the genuine image is there, the right intentions are there? The question why is your greatest friend here. Well, why? We don't want people freeloading off of the medical system. Why? Because if we tamp down a lot of especially communicable diseases, then that makes it less likely all of us are going to get those diseases, and it's a benefit to all of us. Right? Right. Okay. So that's a benefit. When certain illnesses and disorders get diagnosed early and get treatment early, it costs a lot less to do the diagnostic work than all of the treatment that would be necessary if it happened later. So it actually costs us less money to let them into the system. So why wouldn't we want everyone taking advantage of the system? Why? Because when you ask why to somebody of ill intentions, watch what they do. They will either go off into weird flights of fancy about how evil and corrupt people are for wanting to be healthy, in the instance I just gave, or they will be completely flabbergasted and shocked and possibly even offended that you would have the audacity to ask them the question why. Intentions are hard to weed out. It's hard to know if somebody is giving, say, money to a charity because they actually care about the mission of that charity, or they just want the tax write-off. But Jesus gave us a very good tool to use here. You can judge them by their fruits. Say you have somebody who is a billionaire who's constantly giving money to charities to relieve poverty and food insecurity. And yet they keep getting richer. Nobody needs billions and billions of dollars, and they're claiming to see this need to get rid of poverty. Yet they're not restructuring their companies to make sure their workers are paid better, or taking all of that extra money that they're getting to actually alleviate these problems that they claim to be seeing. Oh, I guess they don't actually really care about those. It's good PR and a tax write-off to boot. And if you ask them why they're still a billionaire, listen to the answers that they give. It's very illuminating. And we can do this for a lot of things. Why is your best friend for this type of discernment?
And even to your example there, that's where the why can become asking that why can become very poignant, because billionaires are like, well, I worked really hard, I made all this myself. But you then have to ask, like, well, why? Like, and as you get drilling into that why, questions like, are you charging the community you're serving too much for the product you're delivering? You're making all this extra surplus money. Are you actually robbing everybody by charging them too much? Because most people don't look at it and ask that why question from that perspective of a properly priced item in the community pulls in enough money to cover costs and to pay everybody fair wages and stuff. Like, all of that are good whys. That's good image and intention. But if you're charging people so much that you are hoarding vast amounts of that wealth, you are pulling that wealth out of the community and sitting on it. Like, this is the Western dragon archetype of this evil dragon sitting in the cave on the hoards of treasure as a greedy monster. That is an image, an archetype that really comes in handy here when you're looking at that right image and right intention. So now we get to the fourth one. Ensure it has the proper weight or substance.
Now that's a biggie. When I was coming up in the 90s, there were a lot of very airy-fairy new age ideas floating around. And this is, even if you had gotten through somehow the first 3 steps, this is where they would break down. Well, all you have to do is sit inside this coat hanger pyramid thing with a crystal pyramid on top, and everything will get better. I have to sit here. Huh? Again, our favorite question, why and how, really start coming in here. Because, okay, that doesn't make sense. You've heard us talk about magic and prayer on this channel, and both of them actually require you to do something. A spell doesn't work if you just send energy out into the cosmos hoping that it will. You have to actually do things. Yeah, they're participatory. The same's true with prayer. A prayer that you just ask, may I be healthy, but you're not trying to eat right or exercise, or that prayer, even if it gets answered, is going to be countered by the actions of life. To have proper weight means that it can actually bear what it's meant to bear without snapping. If I tell you, do this meditation and you will never, ever feel sorrow again. The Buddha cried when he heard that one of his friends died. He felt sorrow. He may not have had attachment to that, but that's different from never feeling sorrow. So you're telling me that your meditation technique is greater than that of the Buddha? That's an interesting claim. I think that needs some backup to it. And I don't think that that's probably a weight-bearing timber that will actually hold this building up. Some claims just sound extraordinary. I remember going to a charismatic church meeting when I was younger and hearing, I can't remember if it was the pastor or guest pastor that was there, because people flow in and out of those charismatic churches like water. But he literally said to the congregation, if you get filled with the Holy Spirit, you will never get sick again. I believe in being filled with the Holy Spirit. I believe in the indwelling power of the Holy Spirit. And I believe that God can do miracles. I believe I've seen miracles in my life. But never get sick again? So you're not going to get a cold? Your allergies are going to spontaneously go away? The ravages of old age are going to just ignore you and leave you behind? That's a very extraordinary claim that requires an extraordinary level of evidence that no one can really bring up. So yeah, it's easy to dismiss claims like that. It's honestly the smaller, simpler claims that are harder for us to discern whether or not they can bear the weight that they are claiming that they can. But when we start asking the how question, how can this meditation help me? How can this prayer make my life better? How can going to this church actually do the things that that church is claiming to do? Or synagogue or mosque or ashram or whatever. A lot of them have decent answers. Well, you're going to have, we provide community here. And you go and you see people genuinely living in community. Okay. That seems to be a weight-bearing claim. It seems to be able to actually have the weight to do what it's saying. We never argue in this community. Oh, then you don't have a community.
You're compliant.
I'm sorry, that means you just either don't talk to each other or you've all taken vows of silence. And you just live in your little rooms and you never actually talk to each other, because arguing is not a bad thing. It's how we interact in those arguments that matter. If we hurt each other, that's the problem. So look at the claims and just ask, can they bear the weight of what they are saying that they can do?
And along with that, sometimes these claims can make it all the way down and even have a lot of substance to them. But when you look at it from the other side, especially when they present math, because a lot of times people hear numbers and they just gloss over. When you actually look at the substance of the math cannot add up. I was thinking of a recent example. I'm not going to name specific names. They're naming something, well, they're trying to present something that at the check of, is it valuable? Yeah, we want to make sure our loved ones are safe and kept safe and healthy. So, okay, that's valuable. Along with their claim, is it genuine? Well, they seem to have genuine conviction about it. And it seemed to have the right intention, because they were trying to stop a thing because this was a growing crisis. And I don't know, it seemed like it, but and it seemed like something of substance, but they were trying to claim there was like a 4,000% in growth in this area. People, believing in and following this thing that, and then you start realizing like the amount of the population to have to shift from where the numbers actually say it was to get to that 4,000. We're talking like 40% of the population. Like basically, if you and another person are in the room right now, odds are in favor of one of the two of you are in a very small niche of the population. Because we already know this is a very tiny niche. And odds are one of the two of you are not out of that niche. Like, I'm trying to name specifics, but it was just instantly, you could see the substance was not proper.
It just fell apart.
It just fell apart. And you could see a lot of these other claims where it might pass some of these other checks, but then it doesn't have proper substance. The math doesn't actually add up. It's kind of nice when it's a math one, because you can actually sit down and look at the math and be like, oh yeah, there's no way you can actually, it's like when like budget cuts, like you hear this all the time. Okay, yeah, it's good to properly use our resources. That's valuable. Genuine, okay, yeah, we genuinely all want to do that. Right image intention, maybe it passes that for you. But when you're looking at proper substance, if they're talking about slashing something that's like maybe 5% of the expenses, like think about in terms of your own household, when you're weighing the proper weight and proper substance of that in your own household, if you have something that you're spending half of your money on versus something you're spending 5% of your money on, making a small change in the half is going to make a much bigger impact than making a small change in 5%.
To give a very practical example, when somebody does not take the whole picture of something into effect, and it says something like, we should cut the national parks budget because it's just way too much. For every $1 we spend on a national park, we make $38 back. Yeah. That's a very good investment. That's an insane investment. You spend $1, you make $38. I can't think of anything that works at a scale like that. So that also means, conversely, for every $1 we're not spending, we're actually losing 38. So that's, cutting off your nose to spite your face. Now, one of the things that I want to bring up here, because now that we've kind of shown you this discernment method, one of the things that it helps us do, especially as we start looking at these things as spiritual technologies, we can see why it's confusing that people got involved with things to begin with, and also how to fix them. And I'm going to give one of my favorite examples that I came upon in the last 5 years: the utopian movements. Utopias can't exist. People are too complex to live in a truly ideal and perfect state. There's always going to be a little something over here, something over there. There's going to be this push and pull, and you're never going to be able to just take a bunch of random people, plop them down in a random place, and say, we are Utopia now, which is what the utopian movement was in the in the 17th, well, the 18th, 19th, and 20th century. There's a huge flaw there. We take a bunch of random people, and we're all going to magically change everything about ourselves, and we will have a utopia for all time and eternity. Okay, I'm not going to take the time right now to go through these 4 steps, but I think you can start seeing where each one starts kind of breaking down when we get there. And then Hansi Freinacht, in one of his books, says, we've lost the ability to conceive of utopias because we know they're not possible. But what we're forgetting, and what we've lost, is utopia is a goal, not something we actually build. Utopia is the story we tell ourselves about what things would be like if they were perfect. And then we stretch ever towards it. And then he goes on to say what we need more of in this world right now are honest utopian communities. People who have a vision of this would be perfection if we could get there. And then strive towards that perfection while being honest about, oh, we're not there yet. We haven't gotten there yet. So see what he did there to fix this problem. He brought honesty in. He brought integrity back into this. He made it load-bearing and valuable. Now it's not this pressure and pain on us to always abide by the rules and do everything exactly right because we're in utopia and we can't not pretend that we're not in a utopia now. No, utopia is a vision, something we strive towards, something we seek to have, because it's good to have goals that are slightly out of reach. Because in that stretching, we learn what's actually in the gap between here and there and fix problems we never could have seen otherwise. That's how this becomes very valuable. Here, I'm going to say a person. Hansi Freinacht is actually 2 writers who work together under a pen name. I'm going to say he because it's just easier. He saw this thing that is valuable to us, being able to set up a vision, something to stretch for, and saw that while he did not use Cassian's method here, he used his own and found it just flawed, just infinitely flawed in so many ways. And then applied those discernment principles back to it to find a way to fix it and make it better. And I agree with him. Having a vision of a perfect world is a good thing because that's something to strive towards. But we never fool ourselves into thinking that we are already there or that it is even right at the door, because it is the goal that we are ever striving towards that helps keep us focused. Because what a utopia really is a statement of all of our values and beliefs, wants and ambitions collected together so that we can move in that way.
And that is the interesting thing, is once you start looking at these as technologies, right, you can apply it to that. So then, like in Charlie's example there, you yourself can know, I'm into this because it has this value. I'm into it. It is genuine because ... And you can give the example why it's genuine. You can make sure that even when you're sharing or talking about it, you can look at, to have right intention, to make sure it bears the right image, the right intention. You can go, okay, I need to hold that in mind so that I don't stray from the path, as we like to say. And you can make sure it has that proper weight and substance. And so instead of just discerning for something out there, now you can also look inward and go and stand sure-footed on something that you're holding valuable, because you know what makes it genuine, what keeps it bearing the right intention and the right image, and you know what its weight and substance actually is.
And that's really the practice we want to leave you with today. We really want you to take this idea, these 4 elements, and just start applying them to questions that you have, concerns that you have, ideas that are presented to you. How do they stack up? With as much honest rigor as you can. There are many well-meaning beliefs that I've had throughout my life that don't survive this test.
Yeah.
But when I decided I didn't want to give them up, I didn't just go, well, I'll ignore everything that's wrong with them. Now I've seen the problems with them. How do we fix those problems? How do we tinker with it? How do we improve it? Because it means something to me and I don't want to lose it. How do we tinker with it to make it work? What's necessary? What's missing? And as we're heading out today, I just want to offer you just a simple vision. We often end with a prayer or a blessing, but I want to just offer you a vision, something that you can hold and carry with you throughout your day. Discernment is not the enemy of devotion. In fact, devotion without discernment is just blind obedience, and there's no discernment. Devotion without discernment is just blind obedience. Without discernment, you're not actually devoted to something. You're enslaved by or owned by it. Discernment is the vital aspect of your own autonomy that allows you to have agency in this world and in your actions. Exercise it. Don't give it up, and don't offshore it to other people. It is a valid and very vital part of life. Amen.
Amen.